to ASEAN People Speak Season 3. I'm Regine Jessica Abuel, your host for this podcast. For our fifth episode, we will be joined by an expert and advocate in the area of child protection. He will share with us his knowledge on the current issues faced by children in the online realm. He is the director of International Justice Missions, or IJM, Center to End Online Sexual Exploitation of Children, a leading global-facing team in combating the crime by partnering with governments, industries, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders to expose, neutralize, and deter online sexual exploitation of children globally. Previously, he worked as a lawyer for 6 years, managing complex civil litigation, internal investigations, and family law cases. He also worked as a social worker for 2 years, specializing in child protective services and mental health. Our guest also lived in the Philippines for 7 years, working with IJM. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. John Tanagho. Hello, John.
Hi, Reg. Thank you so much for that kind introduction.
Thank you, John. And we believe that you are in the United States now?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, very nice. And it's interesting that you're in the US now, and you've actually worked for a lot of years here too in the ASEAN region, here specifically here in the Philippines. So we are very excited to have you with us in the show. And of course, although our topic is very serious, I know that we will be having a very meaningful and fruitful conversation regarding the topic. So let me start off with our first question. John, can you tell us what are the emerging issues of children relating to technology, particularly abuse and exploitation?
Sure. Well, today, children are being sexually abused and exploited online at a massive scale in many different ways. There are financially motivated offenders who are trafficking children, and they're sexually abusing children live in video calls and live streams for offenders around the world who are paying for each abusive live stream. The children are also being abused in what's known as financial sextortion, where somebody online gets them to send maybe a nude image or a nude video of themselves, and then they blackmail them. They extort them for money. And then, of course, there are, we've heard of child sexual abuse and exploitation material, images and videos that offenders are sharing on the internet, in messaging apps, and even on the dark web. And all of this is harming children in very, very severe ways, including very young children who are not even users of the internet, children who are 6 years old, 7, 8, 9 years old. IGM has even supported law enforcement in the Philippines who have safeguarded and protected infants who were being exploited and abused in this way. Yes, unfortunately, because that is what the sex offenders have asked for, have demanded. So there are so many ways that children are being abused. And just to give you some numbers, because I think it might be helpful for listeners to get a sense of some numbers. Globally, in 2022, the U.S. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received 32 million cyber tip line reports of suspected.
Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot of numbers.
It's incredible. 32 million of child sexual exploitation. And for ASEAN, there were over 6.7 million of those cyber tip line reports sent to ASEAN member states. So if you think about it, that's over 20% of the world's cyber tip line reports actually relate to ASEAN member states. And unfortunately, the Philippines received the highest number within ASEAN, followed by Indonesia. And I mean, it's incredible because IJM, we've been working in the Philippines, and we actually were able to do a prevalence study in partnership with some survivors in the Philippines. And we were able to determine through this study called the Scale of Harm that nearly 500,000 Filipino children were sexually abused to create new child sexual abuse and exploitation material for sale to offenders, including in live streams, these live video calls that are happening And that was all also just in 2022. So I hope
That's
that gives
very
the
recent.
kind of the
Yeah.
listeners, yeah, a sense of the scale
Mhm.
and the ways that children are being exploited online.
Yeah, and I'd like to pick up from what you said about the scale of harm, and I also got from your answer a while ago the dark web. So, if you could just give us a little bit of background, what is the dark web and what happens there? I do know a little bit about it, but can you give us a little bit of context? And how do you think this ever growing AI or artificial intelligence technology contribute to online sexual abuse and exploitation of children?
Sure. So most of the sexual abuse and exploitation of children that's happening is happening actually not on the dark web, but on, the surface web, which is
Oh,
basically,
really? Even
yeah,
just the surface web.
all, yeah, just the common, video chat, social media apps that we all use every day. That's actually where most of the exploitation and abuse is happening, is being recorded, is being shared. Now, what you have with the dark web is, a part of the internet that is not just easily accessible by just going online, but people
Mm-hmm.
have to connect to it through what's known as Tor or an onion router. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
a very like specific, part of the internet that the majority of people are not actually accessing every day. You have to be a little more sophisticated to access it. And that's where a lot of sex offenders are sharing child sexual abuse and exploitation material in these groups with very specific links. So it's not like someone could just go online and search for the dark web and be connected to it. They have to have a very specific link, and then that's how
Mm.
they would access child abuse material. When it comes to AI and artificial intelligence, what we're seeing actually today is people can use artificial intelligence to create and to generate child sexual abuse material. And this is actually, a very serious problem, because they can take an image, or an innocent image of a real child in an
Mm-hmm.
ASEAN country, and then using that image, they can create a video or a photo of child sexual abuse and exploitation. Even if that child was never actually physically abused, they could make it look like they were abused
Oh.
and then share that material. And the challenge is it looks very real. The Internet
Mm-hmm.
Watch Foundation, which is based in the UK, has reported that these images, AI generated CSAM, can look like real images and videos. And so it's actually wasting the time of law enforcement, because they may
Yeah.
not know, is this a real child who has actually been abused and we need to go find them and bring them to safety, or is it
Yes.
AI generated? So I think it's an obstacle right now.
Yes, and you've mentioned a while ago that it's just a random picture of a child. And now the challenge is if that person or that child is really a child, or there's an AI generated technology that, helps that child to move, act, or pose in a certain way. And I guess I've just seen images of celebrities, for example, who are their faces are imposed or superimposed
Mm,
on certain bodies, but that is very prevalent also in children, and this is being used as a way to exploit them or to get money from these kinds
yes.
of images. And that's very sad to know. And you mentioned a while ago that a lot of law enforcement agencies are having a very hard time because the first obstacle is identifying whether these people or the persons identified there are real or not, right? So,
Yes, that's correct. And I think, it can be a problem in many different ways, because the more child sexual abuse material, whether it's of a real child or it's AI generated, the more CSAM that is being shared online, that is being watched and consumed by offenders, the more it's becoming normalized in society.
mm,
And so you have this danger that children are more likely to come across CSAM, and they all of a sudden may think that this is actually normal, that it's okay for a child to be sexually abused by an adult or forced to engage in different, sexually explicit acts in that's recorded. if that becomes normalized, even more normalized than it already is, then I think this will lead to even more exploitation and abuse of children, because all of a sudden it's not seen as something that is strange or
Yeah,
dangerous, but it's seen as
exactly.
something that is normal because it's out there. And if
Yeah.
it's there, then offenders can show it to them and say, "Oh, look, these children are doing it. It's actually okay," and they can almost manipulate children in that way. So it's a problem.
So, John, can I also ask? You've mentioned how AI is being used to exploit children, but does AI actually also help in addressing online sexual abuse of children, or is it contributing to online sexual
So
violence?
yeah, artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning are actually being used to develop technology that can detect new child sexual exploitation material, or what's called first generation child sexual abuse and exploitation material. And for example, there's this safety technology company that's based in the UK called Safe to Net, and they had a partnership with the Internet Watch Foundation. And what
Mm-hmm.
they did is they trained their technology on images and videos of child sexual abuse and exploitation that the
Mm,
IWF lawfully held, because they're responsible for identifying these materials and providing them to law enforcement. And so they train their technology. It's called Safe to Watch. And what it
mm.
can do is it from the internet to
Mm-hmm.
counter it, even in real time. And what's amazing is it can be used in a way where the technology can be embedded to someone's device, to their phone,
Mm.
or to their laptop, or their any kind of
Device?
uh, you know, yeah, device, and used to using the operating system, it can then detect and block people who are trying to
Share.
produce, trying to
Produce.
share, or even trying
Oh,
to record child
oh,
sexual exploitation and abuse. And if it can block it, then it can prevent the abuse from being recorded, from being
yeah.
streamed,
Mhm.
and all of this in a way that protects privacy, because if it's happening on the device, then there's actually no tech company that needs to be monitoring or watching or surveilling. It's just the technology is built into the device itself,
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
can operate in a very preventative way. And I think
Yeah.
that's that's how governments and tech companies should be thinking about AI these days. How do we use AI to protect children,
Yes.
um, and actually instead of AI being used to harm them?
I was actually about to ask you, how can ASEAN or its member states address issues like privacy, online safety, and digital literacy? And you've actually mentioned this device that um, non-government organizations use. But do you think the ASEAN or its member states can also do something other than these kinds of AI technologies?
Yeah, so ASEAN member states have come together and developed the regional plan of action for the protection of
Hmm.
children from all forms of online abuse and exploitation. And this is a very powerful regional plan of action. And I think what ASEAN member states can do is really come together with civil society, with survivors of abuse and exploitation, and with the tech companies themselves, and make sure that there is technology that's being used to protect children from exploitation online, to detect and remove child sexual abuse material, and even to address this in live streaming, but to do it in a way that still protects people's privacy.
Yeah.
So I think what it takes is this kind of multi-sector
Mm.
collaboration, working together. And I'll give you one example, because I think really, the role of government is really to pass laws, right? The governments pass laws, they can pass online safety regulation, which essentially creates the standards for safety to ensure that all of these online products, these social media websites, these
Yeah.
apps are actually safe for users and the public. Not only do they protect people, their privacy, and that their data is not being compromised, but also that they protect children from sexual abuse and exploitation. So the role of government is really pass the laws, pass the online safety regulations. And I'll give you an example of that. The Philippines last year passed the anti-OSIC, or anti-online sexual abuse and
Mm.
exploitation of children. This is Republic Act 11930. And one of the provisions requires tech companies to install mechanisms or measures designed to prevent, detect, respond, or report child sexual abuse and exploitation material, and install available technology and software to ensure that access to or streaming of violations of the act will be removed, blocked, or filtered. So, as part of that, the Philippine government actually consulted with civil
Mm.
society, they consulted with the
Mm.
technology sector. And so I think that's really the role of government. I think when it comes to the tech sector, it's really about building their platforms and their products safe by design. And so I
Mm.
think
Mhm.
moving away from just being reactive, but moving towards a preventative approach. And this is really where I think the role of survivors and children is very important,
Mhm.
because we want to make sure that tech companies should actually be consulting with survivors. They should sit down with survivors who have been harmed on their platforms and find out, how did this happen?
Yeah.
How is the platform, whatever it is, whether it's Facebook, or it could be
Twitter or
Microsoft
X.
Skype,
Yeah.
Twitter, or TikTok,
Or
any of these
Zoom.
platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should really sit down with them and say, how were you harmed on our platform? What happened? And then learn from them to make their platform safe by design. I think there should really be that type of corporate social responsibility.
Yeah.
And then governments really can kind of create the legal framework so that tech companies can do both,
Yeah.
protect privacy and also protect children and other
Children.
vulnerable populations from abuse and exploitation online.
Yes. And thank you so much, John, because you've actually given us a very beautiful approach in trying to point out a multi-sectoral collaboration. I'd like to pick up from what you said a while ago, that different sectors have to come together so that a solution can be made. It cannot just be the government or the member state, but there's also a role that the private sector or tech companies would have to play. But more importantly, also in collaboration with the victims or those who have experienced online sexual abuse, so that they will be given a voice. And at the same time, instead of a reactive approach, there is a preventative approach that you just mentioned a while ago. And the key word that I'd like to emphasize there also is that it's safe by design. I like what you said, that it's safe by design, and it's actually catered to victims, and at the same time protects the privacy of people who are using the internet or are going online. So thank you so much for sharing with us how ASEAN member states can collaborate and implement policies to protect the rights of children while encouraging technological development and innovation. And at the same time, I guess I just want to give my thoughts on how the role of governments and civil society organizations, particularly the private sector and tech companies, can play in promoting a safer and more inclusive digital environment for women and children in ASEAN. Thank you so much, John. And on that note, I know our listeners are already very interested on this topic, but maybe to sum everything up.
Sure. Yeah, I think to sum it up, I would just I think there's fear and sometimes misunderstanding about safety technology.
Mm-hmm.
People are maybe they don't understand, how do the tech companies detect child exploitation material? Will it violate someone's free speech or someone's privacy? And I think it's important that there's more dialogue about
Yeah.
safety technology so that everyday users and citizens would really understand how do these technologies work, and there can even be transparency with governments. So tech companies could need to maybe submit transparency reports to governments and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, here's what we're doing to address child exploitation on our platform. Here are the tools we're using. Here's why it's safe. Here's why it's accurate. All these things. But for example, in the Asia Pacific region in Australia, the government has an e-safety commissioner, which is their online safety regulator, and they are
Mm-hmm.
requiring regular transparency reports from tech companies, and they're issuing notices to them. And I think this kind of transparency
Monitoring,
between the
transparency. Yeah.
yeah between the private sector and governments is very important, because ultimately it is the responsibility of governments, ASEAN member states, to protect their public
Yeah.
from violence, all forms of
Yes.
violence, including child sexual abuse and exploitation online. But of course, they have some type of a limitation when it's happening on different tech platforms. And so there needs to be that open collaboration and
Yes.
transparency.
Yes.
But ultimately, I think it's absolutely possible. I think we have to imagine an online environment where people in ASEAN member states can enjoy the benefits of the internet
Yeah.
without suffering from violence and exploitation. We have to have a higher expectation for that, because the status quo is just, it's unacceptable that
Yeah.
500,000 Filipino children could be sexually abused and exploited in just 1 year. How many more are also being harmed in other ASEAN member states? And
Yes.
really, it's not fair. We should have a safe internet, safe social media platforms, and also ones that people can feel like they can benefit from them, but not at the risk of children being exposed to
Yeah.
harm. So yeah, I would end with that. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for
thank
having
you
me on
so
your
much. Of
podcast.
course, John. Thank you so much. And the insights that you have shared with us is actually very meaningful and at the same time reflective of how it is nowadays. As I've told our listeners a while ago, this topic is very relevant. And thank you so much for emphasizing that there needs to be a dialogue between the government, the private sector, and of course, we also take into consideration the victims so that these things would have, it wouldn't just be a reactive response, but a preventive
Mm,
response as well, so that people who use the internet feel safe because their privacies are protected, but at the same time, most especially children and women, but particularly for this topic, children feel safe to use the
mm.
internet because they will not be used for exploitation. So thank you so much. That's all for
Thank
today's
you.
episode for ASEAN People Speak. Thank you for listening, and thank you to John for joining us today. Would you want John to promote your social media account or any website, your organization, IJM, or publications or upcoming projects?
Sure. ijm.org.ph/. That's the website of
Mm-hmm.
International Justice Mission Philippines, where you can find so many resources and see the work that IJM is doing in partnership with the Philippine government and with survivor leaders. And then I would actually like to plug this true crime podcast that a
Mm-hmm.
survivor featured in. Her pseudonym is Ruby, and it's
Mm-hmm.
called The Fight of My Life. So if you just look up The Fight of My Life, Finding Ruby is an amazing podcast where a survivor from ASEAN, from the Philippines, shares her story and talks about how actually her life was transformed. And now
Yeah.
she is this leader. She's an advocate, and she speaks
Yes.
all over the world. So it's actually an amazing podcast and resource. I would encourage people to listen to it. It's super powerful. An International Justice Mission in the Philippines is working across the country in partnership with local civil society organizations, in partnership with media and the Philippine government to protect children from online exploitation. And we're always willing to come alongside those who want to partner with us in the Philippines and also regionally So we're happy to be contacted in that way. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Reg. I really appreciate this.
Yes, and thank you so much, John. We really appreciate you as well, and IJM, and the things that you have shared today. And we will definitely look into that true crime podcast, Finding Ruby. It sounds so interesting, and I'll definitely listen to it after this episode. So thank you so much, John. Join us again next week, everybody. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on Spotify to stay updated and never miss an episode. You can also stay connected with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by following at WGSCNHRMEC. And you can also visit our website at scnhrmec.org. Thank you so much, guys, for listening today. We will see you again next week. Stay informed and stay engaged. Goodbye.